Have a seat, please. Have a seat. Okay, thank you everyone for joining our panel on the issue of deterrence, arguably one of the bread and butter tasks of NATO. I'm going to heed the advice that was given earlier and try to stop being polite and perhaps be a bit more pessimistic. And I mean that in the best possible way, in the nicest possible way. But we just cannot close our eyes to the fact that the unity that we need to project deterrence is perhaps lacking at this point. And I'm curious to hear the panel's view on this, and I'm very curious to hear the audience's view to what extent that holds true. Before we start, I wanted to ask the audience a question that perhaps can help guide a little bit or gauge where we stand today. And I want to ask you all to load up your apps, if you could. And there will be a multiple choice question posed in that. And in the meantime, I'm going to introduce our panel today. We have from Lithuania, the defense minister, Raimundas Karoblis. Welcome. Thank you. We have retired General Knud Bartels from Denmark, a former chairman of the NATO Military Committee. We have Commander Helena Linder-Jess, the first female commanding officer of the German Navy. And we have Noam Perski of Palantir International. So the question you see here is perhaps one that I found myself struggling with preparing for this panel, because you can make the case, if we don't have international unity, transatlantic unity, this could be a very short panel, meaning there is no deterrence at all. But of course, last I checked, NATO still exists, and with a little bit of luck, President Trump will affirm Article 5 today, and we'll all go home happy, perhaps. So please take 15 seconds, I was told it would take to vote, and then I'm curious to see what the result is. Okay. So we can't be doing everything wrong, it seems like. Yes, still in the lead, 64% say yes, 35.8% say no. Interesting. So we don't have to be perhaps that pessimistic after all. I would like to get to our panel now and ask each for about 2 to 3 minutes opening statements. Starting with you, Mr. Minister.
Well, thank you very much, and indeed it's very important. I'm glad to participate in this event and this distinguished panel. Yes, indeed, we need to be optimistic, but on the other hand, to do our homeworks, which taking into account the present situation, where we are. So from 2014, where it was the turning point for the world probably order, in particular Europe, was Russia's aggression in Ukraine, Crimea annexation, integration in the east of Ukraine. We saw very clearly that Russia does not respect an international order, international agreements, and the values like sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and others. So, want with that or not, we have conventional threats. New conventional threat, which is Russia, and really Lithuania is one of the countries of NATO which is really most vulnerable from NATO alliance, from this aspect, from the conventional threat, as well as, of course, we face permanent attacks from hybrid side. And a lot was done from 2014. So the EFP presence, and probably it's one of the most efficient mechanisms so far which we have. And probably it's the stance, political stance of NATO, as well as the mechanisms which we have. These are the major factors why Russia could be deterred today. I'm speaking about today. We have the day of the summit, but really we need to do much more. We expect that this summit, leaders will adopt the readiness initiative, which will be really important, 30-30-30-30. But on the other hand, the readiness of Russia is quicker. So we very much expect that it's really just the beginning, very good start. We will need to follow on. Secondly, so the continuation, adaptation of NATO structures to the conventional threats again, which efficiently started in Wales, then in Warsaw. And of course, other issues would be the taskings for the follow-on forces. Really, the enforcement really it's major subject, and also enablers like air defense, maritime aspects, and others. And another quicker decisions to military to secure, and we very much expect that this continuation will follow. And we will have the real deterrence, and it will be sufficient to tackle these conventional threats. And this is the task for NATO, in my view, for the future. Of course, we should not forget also the South, which also really the situation, and NATO has to play here. We should not forget also hybrid. All countries we are facing interference from Russian side, so cyber, fake news, but also interference in political aspects, and here really we need to bring more and more attention to that, to cooperate closely, to have joint instruments. We have already some with the significant space for the improvement, but also in addition to that, in particular attacking hybrids, we need to work with the society. Resilience in society is really one of the major tasks. Could be, I know that it's not very convenient sometimes for politicians to say to the society that picture is not rosy as they want, but we had that in Lithuania, in the Baltics. And to be serious of the defense, as the defense alliance, we also need to work here. And with going further, we very much expect that this deterrence measures, which is the best deterrence measures for the preparation for defense, will work, and we will have the sufficient measure to tackle Russia's aggression, but not only for today, but also for the longer period.
Okay, thank you for a view, if you will, from the flashpoint of deterrence. Thank you very much. Mr. Bartels, please.
Thank you. I would like to share with you what I call the 3+3 of deterrence of today in 2018. The first three are: 1, political will, or capitals. Are they willing to fight for the values they stand for, or which they proclaim they stand for? 2, the forces which are available, and which, by the way, belong to our nations. Let's not forget that we should not talk about NATO forces. We should talk about the forces of the nations, and the nations put at the disposal of, my third dimension, the NATO command structure. The NATO command structure is a tool which makes it possible to use the forces of the nations in upholding our political will. This is what I call the first 3 dimensions. They include the nuclear one, which of course is always unpleasant, but we need to be able to think the unthinkable, unpleasant as it might be, because we will always be confronted by the unexpected. This brings me to my other 3s, or my other set of 3, of which the first one is the eastern direction, where we are facing Russia, unstable, but to a large extent predictable. Then we are facing the second strategic direction, which is south-southeast, which in the Middle East and North Africa, I think we can safely say, is both unstable and unpredictable. And then my third direction, which is north-northwest, the Atlantic, the high north, which for the time being is stable and predictable, as long as it lasts, depending on how we see the development in the high north. Those are the 3+3 of deterrence to be looked at by Moscow, by Beijing, or whichever capital doesn't like us for a number of reasons. This is brought together by a tool which is called training and exercises. The training, making sure we are ready to what we are going to face, even though we might not know it, train for the unexpected, train for full spectrum operations, and on top of that, exercising, which is a political signal of our coherence and our ability to work together and thereby to deter a potential opponent. Those two dimensions are absolutely essential in bringing together our political will, our forces, our NATO command structure in three different strategic directions where we might have to fight simultaneously a different opponent. It all comes down to what this summit is exactly about: political will. The circle has been closed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for pointing out that there are several dimensions to deterrence. It's not just putting forces in strategic locations, but there are different ideas to what makes effective deterrence. Commander, please.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here. It's a great honor that I'm allowed to represent the tactical level as well a bit. When I joined the German Navy in 2001, which was, by the way, the year where the German armed forces were opened for women in all areas, the general perception was that we were surrounded by friends and partners, and everything was actually very good, so everything was downsized. And now everything is going back to collective and homeland defense. And so the nations really need to do a lot to get back to where they were 25 or 30 years ago. From my experience as a commanding officer of a mine hunter in the German Navy, I can say, especially looking at defense and exercising, as the general just mentioned, there's a lot being done. I've been deployed for half a year with my ship and my crew to Standing NATO Mine Countermeasures Group 1. So there is a lot being done, so I can really understand why people still believe that NATO, the poll we had in the beginning, is definitely able to deter Russia. And of course, a lot more needs to be done, and we need to work on interoperability and continue working in all those fields. But on the other hand, I think that we're not as bad as we always say we are. Looking at the point of deterrence, I asked myself the question whether there's an end state to deterrence, and I think you cannot define an end state to deterrence. As the stakeholders in a scenario or in the world develop, deterrence also needs to develop, and we need to maybe think about new ideas or new ways of deterrence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for alluding to that you bring a tactical view to this conversation. Noam, please.
So it's a little strange as a technology guy to be up here amongst policymakers and tactical commanders. But I think at Palantir we have this weird perspective where our technology is deployed in support of most member states of NATO and way beyond, but not only on the civilian side, not only on the military side, but on the civilian side as well, in the broader security apparatus. And so it provides a pretty interesting perspective. And I've kind of picked out a couple of points on deterrence from what we kind of see happening across the world. They're written down in my extended brain since I'm a technical guy, so apologize for that. But I think we all hold that deterrence comes from our collective preparedness to respond. I think what we're finding when we look across things is that collective preparedness is really based around compatibility, and the ability of rifles to use each other's bullets is pretty given. But our ability of our intelligence operations to use each other's data is not. And I think that's really something that everybody's rudely awakening to now. Now, we're making progress, again, in training and exercises. Trojan Spear this year, the special operations exercise held across Europe, was really the first proper example of being able to operate on a unified data platform and being able to operate on insights and respond quickly regardless of nationality. And I think that's really important to build on as we go forward. Now, I think the other piece here is that the idea of preparedness really needs to move beyond the conventional response. The minister was alluding to this, that the hybrid or disruptive warfare is something that we're seeing as a matter-of-fact kind of ongoing position. And to the question that was posed, do I think NATO is an effective deterrent against conventional war? I would probably also say yes. Is it an effective deterrent against hybrid warfare? I would venture to say no. The repercussions are not there, and it's very, very, very difficult to identify attackers and to properly respond. So deterrence actually becomes an even bigger deal in the world where disruption and hybrid warfare is the norm. And I think here we ended up in a very interesting place where the conception of understanding the human terrain becomes really, really important. You know, in conventional military terms, understanding where your enemy is incredibly important. But in a disruptive hybrid world, understanding where your enemy is much, much, much more difficult. And it also crosses between the civilian and the military space in a way that's quite novel. And it really puts a lot of our traditional structures at play, where militaries can't surveil their own populace, their own citizenry. How do you understand where to look? How do you understand how to map the human terrain? How do you work between civilian agencies that have counter-terror missions and counterintelligence missions and the military space? Do we have the legislative room to do this? And do we have the technical platforms and technical prowess to do this? Because we've developed military technologies and civilian technologies in silos. And so now we don't only need to interoperate between countries during our exercises, but our agencies within our countries need to interoperate. And that's a very, very, very difficult dimension that we see kind of across the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll get back to the issue of technical compatibility. I want to stay a little bit on the issue of intangible compatibility, namely because we have this rift between Washington and much of Europe. And I want to ask you, Mr. Karoblis, coming from a country where you need NATO to be there, and seeing here President Trump's comments beforehand, sowing this disunity, how does that make you feel?
Well, indeed, NATO has the existential meaning for Lithuania, for the security. It's really existential aspect, and we need NATO, but also we need the leadership of the United States. And I agree with colleagues that really we need the political leadership, political will, and also, of course, we need the unity, which is the key. And the real deterrence could work only if we are united, and if the Kremlin has no doubts that in case of the aggression, the Article 5 will work from the first day, and it will be the adequate response. Speaking about the United States, well, we will always remember the role of the United States in our independence, starting from non-recognition, then 2014, when with reinforcement of air police mission, then the company-level assurance initiative, and then even now. So really, we have this year we had the largest scale exercises in Lithuania and the Baltics. So by the scale led by Americans, so we have the presence. We have excellent cooperation in different formats with different forces. Well, you mentioned soft exercises. It's really one of the most important issues. So really we communicate each and every day. We have a lot of assurances starting from Secretary Mattis, let's say, messages, which from the very beginning, from January and then February, and we have now. So in April it was the summit between three Baltics and US, three presidents, four presidents, and we have the assurances, we have the declaration about the concrete cooperation in the security matters and, of course, of defense. So really, we don't have any doubts both in NATO and the United States. We treat the NATO, United States, and some kind of tensions and unpredictabilities as the matter of the family. everything is growing in the family, but here we really need to find the agreements and to live together, be united for the sake of NATO alliance, where the importance is increasing, and to work together both in the eastern direction, in southern direction, and in every direction we need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You mentioned NATO and U.S. leadership as they're one thing, but they could arguably be considered two things. Is one more important to you than the other?
So both aspects are really important. So both bilateral with United States, but nevertheless the main frame is NATO. And so both Europe needs and we need the European Union, and we believe that the United States also need Europe. It's about allies and about the legitimacy of what we are doing in the world. And also it's about working with countries of like-minded countries and which could have a unified position. So it's definitely we need to safeguard this multilateral approach which we have. On the other hand, we are speaking not only about the United States, but we could speak also about the other formats of the cooperations, like, for example, Joint Expeditionary Force led by the United Kingdom, European Intervention Initiative of France, but we believe that these formats could amend the NATO structures, NATO efforts, but not compete. So we very much think that, of course, we don't have any option, not know any plan B, than to have NATO as the collective defense alliance in Europe, with the leadership of the United States and the adequate contribution from European countries.
Mm-hmm. Commander, I wanted to get back to you because you, as a tactical member of this panel, you talked in the green room briefly about some of the missions you did out on the Baltic Sea. Tell us about that and where sort of what the deterrence in practice looks like. It's a terribly theoretical term, I think, so we're interested to hear.
Yes, I think it is terribly theoretic, and a lot of people probably can't really imagine like the small things that happen maybe at sea that fall into that area of deterrence. In 2014, I was deployed for 6 months with my ship to, as I said, Standing NATO Mine Countermeasures Group 1, and we operated mostly in the Baltic Sea. There were 8 ships in total, and also in the North Atlantic. So what we experienced was when we had exercises, there were also Russian units near our group looking at what we were doing. Of course, you've all heard about those encounters at sea and the story which was in the news where the Russian fighter flew by very, very near to a frigate. In my opinion, that was all we encountered. So in my opinion, I think you shouldn't dramatize the situation, but rather look at it from a perspective that allows to develop countermeasures against it and stay focused on how to reply and not seeing it as a huge problem or not thinking that Russia might attack NATO in the next months. So I would say the situation isn't as bad as it always looks like. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. General Bartels, as someone who has worked inside in the depths, the underbelly of NATO, if you will, if we look at the bureaucracy of how NATO is set up, is there the potential for the alliance to work with a more comprehensive understanding of what deterrence is? And I'm talking about the mechanics inside, how things are measured, the different contributions the nations made.
There definitely is, but it brings us back to what is a fundamental dimension, which is the alliance is made up of the 29 allies. And the 29 allies discuss and deal what they want to discuss and deal with. It is not something the bureaucracy invents. The bureaucracy, from my experiences, can be quite imaginative, come up with good ideas, give the right advice, but if the capitals, for whatever reasons, good or bad, have a different perspective, it doesn't go anywhere. Also, we have to keep in mind that consensus at 29 can be tricky. Not so much the newer members, rather the old founding members can be tricky, but that's how it is. I think it's important to focus on what the capitals are thinking and what all of you present here, you go back and say to your capitals and to you, wherever you're coming from in your capitals, and say what needs to be done and how we're going to do it. This would be much more than anything else, would be facilitating. And then let me just come with a very short remark, because picking up exactly on the commander's perspective, we should be careful not to dramatize. Now, some of us in this room have grown older, maybe not wiser, but at least older. And we remember the 70s with the impact of the Vietnam War on NATO, and the 80s with the peace movement and the double decision due to the stationing of Soviet SS-20 missiles, etc., etc. The huge peace movement demonstrations which were manipulated by the Soviet Union, the left extremist terrorist organizations such as Rote Armee Fraktion, the Red Brigades in Italy, etc., etc. And now we are surprised by what we are seeing, maybe was in a slightly different color. It has never been easy. It is not easy today, and to make everybody comfortable, tomorrow will not be easy either. Mm-hmm. Because that's the reality of keeping together an alliance.
Mm-hmm. Noam, you mentioned something about hybrid warfare and potentially a mismatch between what we think might deter a country may in fact not deter them. I want to pose the question to you and also the Minister. Do we know exactly what deters the Russians?
Could you please be more specific?
Like, do we know does NATO know what to do to deter Russia?
Well, of course.
I mean, I'm saying this because, for example, there is, whatever NATO does, Moscow will sell to its populace as something that was not intended to be.
Well, first of all, we need to do everything, of course, to take all the necessary measures for deterrence and, if necessary, for defense. It's the first aspect. And what was done in Wales and in particular in Warsaw, we think that it's a good beginning and not only. But yes, we need more. We need the full implementation of Warsaw decisions as reinforcement strategy, and we expect to have it, enablers and others. And so the level of deterrence depends on of course, on the level of our preparedness and how serious we are looking for. Will it be enough or not? Russia is also looking, despite some irrationalism, which is by the breaking the order. So Russia is looking also partially from the rational point of view. It's looking to the opportunity. If we will not get these opportunities, of course the deterrence will work. If we will give the opportunities, it will create the doubt for let's say, for unity, or we will have something else in the world when the Kremlin regime will try to, let's say, test the unity of NATO. So it will fail. We need to take at least the measures which are necessary to do and to continue with political will, and we will have that. Now, regarding hybrids, yes, it's a very important tool, of course, by Russia. And I mentioned already the issue of the resilience. In our case, I think in Lithuania, but also in general in Baltics, we succeeded to increase the level of the resilience of the population. They are more critical in terms of fake news and other aspects. Of course, we need to build, and we're building, investing quite a lot of cyber. But also the same, it's necessary in our view to do in other NATO countries, because one of the aims of propaganda is to affect the societies by the propaganda. Another direction is, of course, Russian own population, and the specificity of Russia is always that, so in case of internal problems, social unrest, etc., so all rulers of Russia, they were inventing external enemies. That happened also in Ukraine, and also in the case of such situation, of course, Russia would look to the opportunities. We really need to be very careful to that and really to do everything to avoid so the situation. And lastly, I spoke about the unity once again, but really we could speak a lot. Really, we need to have on all aspects of NATO. We need also on the political decisions which may be not very popular. So we need to look from the objective glance, which is the situation in real, for example, on the basis of intelligence, but then not as we want, really. So, for example, we must avoid the situation that really somebody is saying that and that is impossible because it's impossible politically. We need to look objectively, and also we need prepared for quicker solutions and to adequate responses.
Mm-hmm. I want to get back to you on the issue of, as someone who represents a company that crunches numbers, works for intelligence agencies, special operations forces. What can you tell us about the NATO? And the question may not be as self-evident as it seems. What can you tell us about? Is there a mismatch between what we think we need to deter against and what we are deterring against? And unpack this for me.
It's a hard question. I mean, I think to begin with, I think this conception of deterrence and then preparedness begins with intelligence, right? If you don't understand the threat, how are you going to prepare for it? And how are you going to respond to it? And I think in the conventional sense, our conception is that intelligence is built up over a very, very long time by realistically conventional means. And then we have conflicts that are low intensity over a long time, hybrid conflicts in the Ukraine where we have little green men, where our traditional means of gathering this intelligence and synthesizing it into something useful are really challenged. And our ability to use all the sources available to us, our ability to share that with each other so that data turns into intelligence is actually quite limited. It's high within each silo, but our ability to share it and kind of create a common sense of what is happening in the Ukraine, for example, and share that, and do that at a time scale that is deterrent, I think is the real challenge. So if given an infinite amount of time, we can come up with a good picture of things, but the world moves incredibly quickly. And the minister was alluding to this. We give opportunities, or there are windows of opportunity, and closing those windows of opportunity by moving from intelligence to operation incredibly quickly, I think is the key to properly deterring emergent conflict. And so a lot of this is, what is your technical preparedness to do this? What is your legislative framework for the ability to do this? But really, in the special operations context, this has been something that people have been working to for a long time. So can we have zero gap between intelligence and operations? So we prepare our intelligence, we make some decisions, we go into the field, and then what we're doing in the field evolves based on new intelligence. And that sounds like very matter of fact, but anybody who's actually been in the military context understands how hard that is to actually do. Because the bulk of this work is being done by producing PowerPoints and showing them to each other and then reporting back on radios still. And so if we want to properly prepare for and deter emergent conflict, we have to demonstrate the ability to respond really, really quickly and create intelligence, action it, and create a kind of a virtuous cycle of understanding the world, acting on it, and then and understanding the new situation. So I think that's my perspective.
Okay, thank you. Please.
Yep. I think you are picking up an issue which is extremely important, the intelligence dimension. Maybe the greatest hurdle today when we are talking about intelligence is not so much gathering the information and putting together a coherent picture which can be presented to the decision maker. I think that can be done reasonably fast with modern technology, trained and experienced people, etc., etc. It's of course not something you create from one day to another. But the real issue is when you present that to the decision maker, be he military or he or she military, or political, be he or she a minister or whatever, Then comes the real issue. Does it fit into the preconceived world which the person in charge has of what is going on? Military history, and the same goes for political history, is full of surprises. And generally speaking, the information was available, but it didn't fit the purpose. I will not bore you with an endless list of military examples. It might be taking place at the very moment.
Okay, at this point, I would like to open it for questions from the audience. Not everything has to be, it can be very straightforward. Yes, please. And then you, sir.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I represent Ukraine, and my question is to the Minister of Defense of Lithuania. I'm sorry. The question is about not about readiness of NATO, but also about willingness, political willingness of NATO to defend its allies. Also, as we know, this Article 5, if Russia will pretend somehow on Lithuania. I'm sorry that I'm talking about this. Do you think that NATO will use this Article 5 to defend Lithuania? Because, as we know, Ukraine also has defense guarantees under the Budapest Memorandum. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, we don't have any doubts that Article 5 would work, but NATO is family. Well, we have the guarantees here, but of course, with the efficient response, we need, of course, specific measures. Now we have, for example, defense plans, which we did not have before Ukraine. We have the presence of our allies. And the situation is very different from what we have, for example, in 2013, when really we needed to rely only on the national armed forces. But in the case of the conflict, of the imposition of application of Article 5 and arrival of reinforcement and support from allies. First stage already we had in 2014 and until this summer US presence with the infantry company level. Now we have division of labor, so with the presence of the EFP battle groups in all of the Baltic countries and brigade in the United States. In this situation, in the case of aggression will be not only against, let's say, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, of 3 countries together, but indeed against, first of all, 23 countries, and then NATO. And it significantly changed the picture. And also, once again, political will, which now we believe that is present. Already, so one of the examples is the sanctions, which applied to Russia because of the annexation of Crimea and aggression in Donbass. So the political will is to continue to them, and from time to time to strengthen them. So political will is here, and well, we don't have any doubts that it will work, and it is the best measure of the deterrence. Yes, sometimes we have some misunderstandings in the family, but it's the family matters, and we really could not give any opportunities to our adversary that it's really that he could think to risk testing the unity of the NATO and the reliability of NATO. So, yes, we are members of NATO, and the guarantees, they definitely will work, even in worst possible scenario. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. The gentleman there. Can we have a microphone here, please?
Thank you, Stefano Stefanini, Atlantic Council. I was really intrigued by what General Bartels said at the very end about the mismatch between information and decision-making. Obviously, in my diplomatic life, I've run often into the mismatch between diplomatic reporting and political decision-making. But I would have thought that at military level, what matters is the information, whether or not that you adapt your decisions to the information. And if you make a mistake, if the information is not correct, but not disregard an information that you think is correct. Am I wrong?
Please.
Unfortunately, history is pretty rough on the issue. In 1973, the Israelis had come to the decision that Arabs cannot attack. Unfortunately, the Egyptians crossed the Suez Canal and the Syrians launched a major armored attack against the Golan Heights. But it didn't fit into the picture of the world as seen from Tel Aviv in 1973, and it led to the late mobilization and so on and so forth. All the indicators were available. It didn't fit the purpose. You can take the Tet offensive during the Vietnam War. The intelligence officers said, it's coming, there is something going on. Steady, we're doing better than ever. It broke the back of the American population's will to fight the war in Vietnam. I will stop here because I can continue. And it will be boring to death. Not for me, of course, but that's something else. And therefore, I think we all need to keep in mind, be at the political decision-making level or the military decision-making level, that are we seeing what we want to see, or are we seeing what really is taking place or shaping up? And it's a question which can never be answered fully, and it's a question which needs to be asked every single day.
Okay, in the back there, please.
Good afternoon. Alice Panier at the Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. Only the General Bartels has mentioned the role of nuclear weapons in NATO's strategy, and so I would like to address the question to the other speakers. In your view, what's the role of nuclear weapons in NATO's deterrence and defense posture? How has it evolved, and how should it evolve? Thank you.
Who wants to take that on?
Okay. Yes, well, thanks. Of course, I understand that it's a complicated question, and from time to time we have divergent views also in the NATO how we perform. But starting from them, we need to have in mind that Russia's military doctrine already directly said that sets the possibility to use nuclear weapons as ordinary measure. So and really we are faced already with the problem, and also on the other hand, so the strategic nuclear Russia is using also one of the most significant measures, because otherwise, so economically in the scale, they could not compete with NATO. So in this case, we don't have any other option but to also to use this let's say weapon, this tool also from the NATO side. And also it's let's say the modernization and adequate view to the strategic nukes from NATO. Also, it's aspect of deterrence, and with both sides looking in quite similar way. Of course, in that case, only in that case, being strong, also it's possible to have the negotiate and to find the solution. So, in our view, so the role of NATO and its nukes, in particular when Russia has such posture, both strategically and tactically, so really we need to pay more attention. But of course it's for the biggest powers of NATO.
Please.
Thank you. Hello? Yes, Richard Skols, MP from Latvia. So I will just follow the invitation to be maybe less politically correct. So my assumption for the past, at least decade, it seems that NATO has become more reactionary to any external threats or impulses. Is that, something happens, only then we start to act and mobilize ourselves and analyze the risks and potentials. So far we have identified new hybrid warfare as well, incentives that are threatening the NATO, the whole structure. And because of that, we have set up new centers for excellence. The one in Latvia, Stratcom, the one for cybersecurity in Estonia. They're conducting an excellent analysis and research. But what I think, as a policymaker, we lack one thing. They're not operational. And countries are actually not giving concrete guidelines what to do with the information that they are conducting. And coming to my main point, what I wanted to ask, there was also an invitation to have more intelligence sharing among the member states. Should we not actually talk about the strategic forecasting, not reactionary politics among member states, but rather really having a strategic forecasting team that is actually setting different scenarios that we can actually portray different scenarios and how to react in the future, near future, distant future. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. Anyone? You haven't?
Well, there's just one point from my point of view. I think there's a lot of strategic forecasting being done in the NATO countries. For example, well, for Germany, I know there is planning and strategic forecasting, but maybe it's also that you have the feeling that we're being reactive because so much is going on. And of course, you can be planning for a lot of things, and you will never be prepared for everything, actually. And it's a process. So if you plan and you do that strategic planning, things happen and you have to react to those things, and then that interrupts your planning and your going forward and then into that direction.
We wanted to ask the industry, you first, on forecasting. And
so, I mean, I would agree that there's a tremendous amount of forecasting going on and a lot of scenario planning and all of this happening. I think, to your point, you see the world you want to see as a policymaker, as a decision maker, and what we see in different parts of Europe, especially, is this: there's different conceptions of how committed one is to seeing the truth in front of you. And this is very different. That makes like the common conception of what scenarios we're planning for very, very difficult. It's a very different experience to work with Latvia and Lithuania and the populace there, decision makers there who are very responsive to the threat, to other parts of Europe that have very, very, very different concerns, and a populace that's very concerned with counterterrorism and other concerns, migrant flows, as opposed to resurgent Russia. And so I think the more data-driven we can be, as you say, these places are generating research and ideas of how the world is, and the harder it is to hide behind the kind of the truth you want to see. So hopefully that will help move us into a place where we're seeing the same thing. But I think what was very often missing for the decision makers we work with is, what is the end state that the political class wants to achieve? What is the relationship you actually want to have with Russia? So I would put the question back. It's not a question of scenario planning. Like, can we agree what the end state is? And that's a very, very difficult proposition, right? But without that, it becomes very, very hard to have a kind of a shared conception of what it is we're trying to achieve with all of our scenarios.
Two quick remarks. The first one concerning strategic forecast. Forecast, in my little world, is a dangerous word, because it tends to bring you to think only about that. What is required is probably a number of scenarios, the one more unpleasant than the other, which you have to face, and then reflect upon what you would do if you were so faced with it. As to intelligence sharing, which has been mentioned, and it's in connotation with strategic forecast, well, capitals, look at yourself. How much are you ready to share? You can only share what you want to give.
Really briefly, please, I want to move on.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Just two aspects. One aspect from strategic communication, it's strategic view, and so first of all, the measures, of course, of Stratcom, in our case, it's defensive. But speaking widely about the offensive, it's really about spreading the information about the West, about the Western values, about the possibilities, and really we need, in particular, working with Russian society and others, really spreading this information, as it was done in the Voice of America, Free Radio, and other. Really, the channels should be open. So this is strategic view. On tactical level, yes, it depends on each and every country. Speaking about military aspects, about armed forces, we have the procedures actually. So in the case of fake news, it's the procedures of identification, prioritization, and then response if necessary, and presenting to the information. As understand before our exercises, the same as in NATO, there is bigger or smaller scenario regarding tackling fake news and generalist threat.com, and the same which we have also vis-a-vis the biggest exercises, for example, before Zapad 2017, we also had some estimations with potential use of fake news and also other measures from Russia. This should be evaluated and evaluated actually in all these situations.
Okay, thank you. There was a gentleman back there.
Thank you very much. I'm Vladimir Kozin, Red Star Federal Newspaper, the Russian Federation. Concerning nuclear deterrence, once upon a time, the US President Ronald Reagan suggested enthusiastically that the Soviet Union and the United States should transit to defensive deterrence that threatens no one. Nobody has ever devoted a special attention, either in Washington or in Moscow at that time. I think now time has come to come back to this notion, because we cannot stop modernization of strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. We cannot stop doctrines, but nevertheless, there is a good chance it will cost us nothing, even 1 euro cent, to make a transition towards no first use of nuclear weapons between the USA, Russia, between NATO and Russia. Simply because there is an offensive, unconditional nuclear deterrence in the world. And I don't mean that at this very summit participants could arrive at this agreement. But nevertheless, in the foreseeable future, we have to, especially in case then there are low-yield nuclear weapons can be used. I would like to remind the esteemed audience that low-yield nuclear weapons is less than 5 or 6 kiloton. So thank you.
That was more the comment than a question. Thank you. Any other questions, though? Yeah. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Anders Haugset. I am the president of the Youth-Atlantic Treaty Association in Norway, and I'm also working in a government agency that uses Palantir technology, so thank you for that. I have a question for Mr. Perski. So many of today's challenges and threats are technology-based. Could you provide some insight into how technology can provide credible deterrence against some of the modern threats we are facing outside of armed forces? I'm thinking about cybersecurity, I'm thinking about hacking, influencing, misinformation, etc. Thank you.
Thanks. It's a broad scope of a question. I'll do my best in the 3 minutes we have, or a little bit less than that. So I think, first, the conception of a national approach to these things is really important, and nobody's really managed to do that well yet, to be honest. Some of the nations that are under the most threat have, so the Israelis are pretty decent at it, at actually looking at this from a national perspective. What is our posture? What is our understanding? And I mean this from a technical perspective. So not just securing one agency or just the electricity grid, but what is our exposure generally to technical attack? And having technical solutions in place so we can actually make good policy decisions based on this. Right. So the problem today is you can't make a policy decision around what do we need, how do we need to structure our military or our civil response, our disaster response, because you, as a policymaker, don't even understand what is the threat, what is the combined threat to our world. And so we can use technology to do that in the same way that we can use technology to understand readiness. So we have huge issues in Europe around readiness because we can't even answer the question, how ready are we? How ready are our ships? How ready do we have the right people for the ships or for the tanks? And there are good technical solutions to this, and we're making a lot of progress. So we can use technology to kind of better understand our posture, which I think is one. It's more of like a question of hygiene first, right? Let's wash our hands before we try all the antibiotics and things. So let's do that. And then I think the idea here is that human beings are very, very good at understanding threats and adapting to the world. Right? That's what we're good at. Machines are terrible at it. They're still abjectly horrible. If you ever talk to Siri, you know she barely understands you. So this conception that there's this giant AI threat right now that will overtake us and is not quite there. But I think we are at the point where we as people need to be better at leveraging technology to fight these emergent threats. Right? This is very, very obvious in the hybrid campaigns that our institutions are very old and we're very, very good at understanding things that take a long time to develop. We're very, very bad at responding quickly. But we can leverage technology to have a better understanding of our world and then empower the people, the good, great people that we have, to actually do the work of understanding what's happening. That's a kind of a philosophical answer to your question. I'm happy to catch up with you about that, the details of this a little later.
Thank you. And I wanted to, General Bartels, ask you another question as we wrap up the session. Given the disunity we're seeing in the alliance and the effect it has on deterrence, because NATO's enemies presumably do not only feel out the alliance in terms of military weak points, but also weak points in cohesion. Is there, and this maybe I'm totally off the mark here, is there a way to insulate, speaking from a NATO structure, to insulate the deterrence ability from the political turmoils that happen, that come and go? And leave us with something positive to think about.
Personally, I think that too much attention is being paid to tweets by a certain person. I don't even bother to read them. Now, I do not matter, so it doesn't matter whether I read them or not. So I perfectly accept that criticism if it is formulated against me. I would say, as an old soldier, just carry on with the job. Do it as well as you can. Bring our force together. Train them. Exercise them. That will be noticed in the capitals which do not like us for one reason or another. And don't waste too much time on the rhetoric which flies around us, thanks, among other things, to the modern media world. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that as a very fitting closing comment. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much for coming. And as a matter of housekeeping, there will be a coffee break right now, and after the coffee break, there will be a cyber crisis simulation on the main stage. We will have a session digital forensics demo in the breakout room 1. And for the gentleman back there, a new nuclear age is another session in breakout room 2. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.